Welcome to the Spiritual Geek Podcast, Wisdom for Modern Times, where we focus on living with intention to consciously create a life you love and celebrate. I'm your host, Sheila Franzen, and I'm so excited to share another episode with you. Today, Laura has joined me for a discussion about the healing power of fairy tales. Laura Lewis-Barr is an award-winning writer, filmmaker, and educator. She was a graduate student in clinical psychology, but eventually switched majors and earned her MA in theater. Laura's art focuses on mythic stories for personal and collective transformation. Laura's films are made in her basement in Chicago. Her screening events are filled with heart and questions for the soul. You can find more at Laura's website at lauralewisbarfilms.com. So Laura, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm excited.
You're welcome. I'm glad to have you here. So is there anything else you would like to share as part of your introduction?
The only thing that sits on my heart these days is that my little films, I'm hoping if people are inspired to think about them as like a little book club offering. I think I'm finding that they work so well in groups. And so I just want to put that out there. Watching and discussing these in groups is sort of my prayer, one of my prayers.
I love that because I was actually watching some of yours this morning and I thought, how fun would it be to discuss these like with teenagers for some bunch of the topics. I was like, these are like really insightful. Some of them really appropriate for like all different age groups. And so I was thinking how cool that would be that you could have discussions around them. So that's, I like that. I like that a lot. So, yeah. And that's part of the conversation, right? That's the fun we get to have when we dive into the depths of something that seem so simple. There's depth to them. And I think that's I'm guessing part of your love of doing this, right? You're creating short films, and yet there is a depth and a curiosity and a set of questions that I think get inspired from that, right? They make you think. And so I actually was curious as we kind of launch into this conversation, like, what is it about doing this that you love? Like, how did you decide to do stop motion? Where does that come from for these such deep topics that you cover in some of these?
Yeah, I'm so lucky. A lot of my life seems to have come together, I'm sure I'm not unusual to have all these different parts of me. So the part that studied psychology and has loved it, and the theater person, the artist in me, and then studying fairy tales when I turned 50, sort of almost right on track, having midlife, crisis, but having life sort of fall apart in certain ways, and discovering the work of Marie-Louise von Franz, who was somebody who worked with Carl Jung, and she talked lots and lots about fairy tales. And so I was doing theater, and I got the opportunity to make a film and fell in love with films. And when I decided to try my hand at making a film, I taught myself the camera by using these dolls, because I didn't want to make live actors stand around as I tried to figure out how to use a camera. And then I fell in love with stop motion, and the fairy tales that I had been studying were sort of perfect in terms of the length, and in terms of the dolls are pretty, archetypal themselves. So everything sort of came together. And that's basically the pandemic hit right after that. And so I had tons of time. My day job didn't happen anymore. And I was teaching public speaking and other things. I couldn't do it. So yeah, I had tons of time to just devote. So yeah, it wasn't thought out. And I was just thinking today how the most precious things in my life seem to always come as a gift, not something that I try to make happen. I'm always trying to make things happen, but other things seem to just come, and they're really amazing, miraculous gifts, and this is one of them.
Yeah, that art, like there's an aspect of intentional creation in life, and yet you mentioned right there the aspect of receiving, and those sometimes are the most powerful things that happen for us, is what we learn to receive versus what we create. So so the thing, as I was watching some of your short films, I was like, well, how do you come up with an idea? Like, where do you start? How do you how does this process work to take a fairy tale and then find a deeper message in it? That I think fairy tales, well, sometimes they're kind of, I don't know, bizarre to me, to be honest. I can't always make sense out of even some of the kids' ones I used to read. I'm like, our kids joke about them now as teenagers, like those fairy tales were scary. But how do you come up with the idea of what you're going to do in this little stop motion world?
Wow, lots of deep water here, because you're mentioning how fairy tales can be bizarro, and I totally agree. And to me, they're like dreams. And the more I spend time with myth and fairy tale and dreams, the more gifted I am as an artist, because those are all realms that are beyond the ego's understanding. And so to start to explore what those things means to think more mythically or archetypally or whatever the word.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece. I just want to acknowledge that um, I do work with groups about around these films and have discussions. And I think it is a shifting from a certain ego place to a more mystical place of understanding or not understanding and embracing that understanding. That's one thing. But the question of where ideas come from is really such a yummy question, because, and I've just been thinking about this maybe today, that I'm finishing a project right now and I'm getting ready to start a new project. And there's a feeling, I'm wondering if you can relate to this too. There's a feeling almost in my body when an idea comes that feels like it's bigger than me. It's not from me. It's a gift to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a rightness to it that I recognize. And for many years, I have talked about having a muse, and the longer I live, the more I think it's very true that there is some, whatever you want to call it, there's an inspiring energy that I've been gifted with and also challenged with. And also, it's not an easy path to be an artist at all. But I think ideas come, and it's always like that little gasp I feel of surprise that, oh my gosh, wow. And I think fairy tales themselves are so rich that they're a wonderful jumping off place for my own ideas, or the ideas gifted to me. Starting from scratch can be harder, but those ideas come too. That was a lot of answer.
No, I love it. And I love that you bring up like that aspect of a muse, which, it's that aspect of divine inspiration, right? That's kind of where, muse, I was just quickly looking it up of like, where does that word actually come from? And in Greek and Roman mythology, it was each of the 9 goddesses, the daughters of Zeus who presided over the arts and the sciences. And so it really was this aspect of kind of mythological, inspiration in its own way. So that's a really fun word to play with in this realm of creativity and the arts and how you come up with ideas. And like I hear what you describe, and I think of all of my experience and training and work around intuition, and also like you're listening to your intuition in your body of, oh, wow, that feels right. And yet the idea, you know, it, whether that's coming from you and your connection to your own soul, or whether it's coming from an inspiration of, I don't know, maybe who wrote the fairy tale, right? Like you never know where sometimes those inspirations are coming from. But when you listen and honor that feeling of yes in your body, and in your knowing, that's the fun, that's the joy of life, that's what makes it exciting, and then what puts passion into what you're creating and the story that you're going to tell.
It's very trippy to me that an idea comes, and I feel so blessed that I have the ability to make something that other people can watch, and that idea that just sort of mystically came now exists. It's now this thing that's in the world. It's just trippy.
Well, one of the and I think one of my good friends frequently talks about intuition and how it always feels like you're making it up. And there is a way that intuition, or at least that aspect of like when we receive information, or, we get those moments of inspiration. I've always struggled with this, being somebody who is very analytical and in my mind a lot, and then playing in this world in between, spirit and the divine and logic and the mind is, I really had to let go of the idea of whether it was like, it does feel like you're making it up. So I think the idea I had to let go of was it's okay, right? Like it's gonna feel different. And it comes, when you hit that point, and it's taken me a long time to get there, I now know and trust, oh, that was my thought. That came from somewhere else. And I don't always know where it comes from. I mean, I always ask for everything to be of the light and from the light, so that I'm not getting mixed up in things that aren't of the light. Um, but, I now just trust, right? Because after enough years of practice and, different people confirming and different things happening and coming true of ideas and these moments of inspiration that I get. And then, I have a group of friends now where it'll be like, hey, I just got this. And they'll be like, oh, I thought about that yesterday. And it's like, oh, I guess we're all hearing something. So this is what we need to do next, kind of thing. And so, but it does feel weird. It has a different sense in our minds. And it does often feel like you're making it up because it feels like it's your imagination. And so that part of storytelling, right? You are leveraging the imagination. You want people to be imagining along with what they're watching.
Yeah, I think it's funny that our culture has made imagination into just a children's pastime instead of like one of the most important parts of our life as adults. And I know in all of my studies, starting when I was in my 20s and doing transpersonal psychology studies and realizing that the imaginal world is a real world. It's just on another plane, and it's powerful. And Jung was, and Freud were scientists that took that imaginal world so seriously. And I mean, the imaginal world is running the world. It's running politics. It's running the financial institutions. It's running everything that we consider real, I believe. And it's something we all have access to. And yet, somehow I only got re-engaged to it by going to this really amazing school, because I think my opinion in this moment as we're talking is that, yeah, it's just drilled out of us in school.
Yes, well, this would be a sidetrack and a tangent, but our school system, particularly in the US, at least kind of our general public school system, came about in the time of war, when they needed to teach children how to do repetitive things. And so I looked into education a lot for a period in my life, and was kind of fascinated by better ways that we could educate and, round out what is taught to our children. And yeah, I mean, I think there's many adjustments the education system has tried to make. And there's, the alternative education out there, with particularly for a lot of the younger elementary school, where you can do Montessori and Waldorf and some of the other, school environments that have been created, try to touch on a bit more of the, balanced out of each kid on their own journey, and being in their imagination and the playfulness of being a child. And because how much of our healing as an adult is to return to the playfulness of being a child, right? So our inner child, and what is our inner child missing, and our dream world, and what are we trying to process, and all of these aspects of psychology that cross over, in a lot of times same words or different words, but similar themes, that we're trying to interpret dreams and make sense out of our inner world, which is that imaginal world, because that's really our consciousness, right? It's what's going on in our conscious and subconscious is, it is our reality. It's how we see the world. And I love that word, imaginal. I think that's a fun word. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of the inner child and all of that, I think I didn't realize when I was playing in my basement with these dolls that I was also doing inner child work, and that I think so much of my life these days is recognizing that that there are these simple realities, like being connected to that wellspring of the child within us, that is going to heal us and the planet. So this is all everything we're talking about is where I live and what I love.
Yeah, that innocence of creating these little stop motion and longer. Was watching the shorter ones so that I could consume several of them. It does bring a childlike energy just watching it, because you are using dolls, right? Like there's an aspect of that I think drops you into a different energy, just to watch it and listen to it. And like, there's such brilliance in that, because our films and so much of today is so the movies are so intense and almost overdone, right? Like, we have to have more and more stimulus to have a good movie. And yet sometimes it's nice to just not have that, right? We're actually creating in a movie world, the frame rates are so fast, it's even hard and scrambles your brain because it's faster than your brain processes and your eyes and all of that. So I just love the imagination and the youthfulness and inner child that you yet take and cover these really wonderful topics that make you think, right? They make you consider something, which coming back to your point earlier of I loved how you described that fairy tales uh, for them to it's almost like you get to have your as we all do in an imaginal world our own interpretation of them, right? There's not the perfect way to see them, but I think remembering that reminds me to like try to read fairy tales with a different mindset, right? Rather than trying to logically make sense out of them, it's almost like interpreting a dream, as you said. And
Exactly.
dreams are like our dream can only truly make sense to us. Like nobody else can truly interpret that dream. Like I don't think, because it's my dream and my subconscious, right? Like what's a yellow bird mean to me? Well, it's going to mean something different to me based on my life and my experience than it's going to mean to you. And so I feel inspired to think about because I never always connected with all the, even reading them to my kids. I'm like, I cannot make sense out of this, but it's not about making sense out of it. It's like, what inspiration can I get from it in this moment? And it might be different when I read the fairy tale the next time that I have a different inspiration. So I love that, thinking about it more as a dream or a myth.
Yeah, exactly. And I think dreams and fairy tales, as you're saying, they can have profound messages like any work of art. They can have a profound message that we understand over time, and that we understood it one way, and now we understand much more. Fairy tales contain perennial wisdom, I always say, because they came out of oral traditions and were told and retold and retold and refashioned. And there was something, to use more modern language, there was something sticky about them. And fairy tales like, Little Red Riding Hood, for instance, or Beauty and the Beast, or other ones that are really ancient, or Psyche and Eros, they have a lot to say about our psychology. Well, at least that's my belief, and that um, they it be like the shamanic, or the best dreamer, or the best artist, or the most insightful people that found these stories and told them, and then other people told them, and they just there's like a skeleton, a bone structure of really amazing wisdom, and it feels wonderful to hang out in those stories. And they are changing the way I tell my own stories too. Like I can feel their effect on me just when I am composing something, or something's coming through me that I don't know the origin of.
Yeah, and and who knows, like I don't know, I was trying to sit with that sense of what you where you're talking about there. And it's when we have stories like fairy tales told that stand the test of time, so to speak, there's an energy that is created from that construct that is um it's become its own living thing, right? It has the energy of the people who originally created the story. It has the energy of those who retold the stories through time, and how they might have added their own meaning or their own little twist or their own, education, maybe not education, but their own their own moments of inspiration that came through for them, right? And so then you take these, they now have a life, right? They're like, they do have a life, and you're getting to add your own interpretation as you connect into the energy of that fairy tale, right? Like, what's it mean for you, and how do you get to tell the story? There's a lot of fun in that aspect of storytelling, the lost art of storytelling, so to speak, of, taking and now verbalizing it in a new way.
I'm nodding. I'm nodding my head like crazy. Everything you're saying is really right on. Yeah.
So one of the ones I watched that I really enjoyed was The Telling Tale, where you talk about well, I'll let you summarize it, right? Like, I'm assuming they probably are all intimate creations in your mind. This one being about truth. And so, um, but yeah, so tell me about that one. What can you tell me about that one?
Yeah. So it's based on a tale that I heard from the wonderful mythologist Michael Meade. And it's some old story. I'm not sure where it comes from, actually, beyond him. But a story about, in my case, I usually make daughters in a lot of my stories. Sometimes the original is son. But anyway, there's a daughter who um, can't speak or see suddenly. And we find out that the cure for her is for other people around her to tell the truth. And wow, in terms of thinking about individual family systems or the country or truth and reconciliation in the world, yeah, it is a pretty potent metaphor of illness and health and truth and lies, and yeah, that's the basic story, that they discover that if they tell truths around her, she'll get better.
Yeah, and it is a reflection at every level. I think this is where you could come up with, when you talk about people talking about these in groups, like, I'm based on how you just shared, right? How you came up with it is you could have questions that inspire people to have conversation around these, right? Like, it's a, uh, like for me, you think about, well, how do we take this truth and healing when you talk about it across the world, right? Or in politics. And it's like at surface level, it's like, oh yeah, a simple conversation, just tell the truth. But it's like, how would that really change things? How does it really change things when you tell the truth in your family, or when you tell the truth to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that aspect of, I actually just had the opportunity to enjoy a beautiful cranial sacral session this morning with a lot of somatic experiencing, which is, that recognizing and feeling what's in your body. And it's an honoring, right? Like, truth is such a beautiful honoring of what is. And when we uncover the depths of that, and we, tell those truths, and then healing does happen, whether it's healing in a relationship, healing in our bodies. Yeah, I really, such a simple little 5 minute, little 5 minute telling tale. And yet when you spend time and contemplate and philosophize those meanings, you can take them to wonderful destinations.
Yeah, I sense we're kindred spirits in terms of loving the teaching kind of role, or the role of exploring things in depth. I have pages of questions for my films that I use with people. And so one question for this film I might ask um, is there a truth you're ready to tell someone? Or can you remember an experience of losing sight? Not
Mm.
literally, maybe, but I love
Mm-hmm.
kind of asking. The question I ask for every session I do with people is, where are you at in the tale right now? What part are you living? And I think those questions for all of my films, what part are you living, suddenly puts, and Michael Mead taught me that, and other people teach me that too, uh, that puts me in that metaphoric place, um, entering the story, entering the metaphor. And it's powerful. I just witness how people have these shifts when they move into that space.
Yeah, it's the question. Like it, because the question makes us think, right? It brings you back into this moment. So I love that question. Where in the tale are you? That's like I watched it and I know, there's a couple of situations in my life. I know exactly where I'm at in that tale.
Uh,
And it's, not so much my own truth, but just yeah, I mean, just witnessing other aspects of my life and the world, right? Like it truly is when you look at um so many aspects you can well, this is the aspect of analyzing things of the aspect I think that you bring to it, which is really fun. And the depth that you bring is because it's not just a film, right? Your background in psychology and loving Freud and or Jung and Freud and that analytic aspect that they brought to psychology and how we see the world. I spend a lot more time in a spiritual seeking world than I was 20 or 30 years ago, where I was just very much more focused on, self improvement and self development. But that journey really all began, or it got really deep when I committed to doing psychoanalytic work for many years. And so the depth of what's available in any given topic or any given thought um, is there's an onion to unwind in anything you bring up. So that part I is a lot of fun, and I can see in fairy tales now, which I didn't quite get before we started the conversation, the depth that you can unwind in any story, right? Any fiction story, right? Even fiction stories, there's a depth of understanding to unwind and ponder and think about. So it's a lot of fun.
I'm always a student of it, that's for sure, and always trying to figure out what makes a work spiritual or what points us in that direction. And is everything spiritual or is everything a teaching vehicle? And I think you're right. I think any work of art, I think, has that potentially to it. But but recently we went to the theater, my husband and I, and we saw a musical called Hades Town, which won a bunch of Tony Awards, and it's about Persephone and Hades in Hades, and it's also about Eurydice and Orpheus. So all of these mythological characters, but it didn't feel like, and I'm spending all of this time trying to explore these from a psychological viewpoint, and it didn't feel like they did that. And I could feel the difference, and it made me wonder, well, what is the difference? Like, what does it mean to approach this work from that spiritual psychological place? And I think it is what you're saying, that you're looking to the depth. Like they had a kind of a joke because Persephone is the goddess who gets taken to the underworld by Hades and stays there 6 months, the winter months of the year. And well, what is that? What is it to be? What is it to descend? What is it to make a
Mm-hmm.
descent in myself? And that's a pretty serious topic. And they didn't really go there, and that's fine. You know, it was fun. I enjoyed it. But I'm a student of this, and it's fascinating to me to do this other kind of type of work that not everybody wants, but some people, I, like you're saying, I think, what what can we create for the world? I think I'm doing this for no money. It costs me money. Sometimes I feel like a real dope for it. Like the capitalist kind of messages make me wonder, I wonder why. And I do it because it needs to be done on some level. We need to make art that, or I do anyway, that that speaks to this spiritual thing that's so important to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, uh, and I'm glad you're doing that. It is beautiful. Um, yeah, and like not everything has to go there, but I think it's how you see the world, right? Like A Course in Miracles, one of my favorite ones that I always remember is nothing has meaning except the meaning you give it. And that's, you know, a lot of people take the meaning other people give to things as their own versus exploring what does it mean to me? And I think that's what is really powerful in what you do is you're exploring what it means to you. And in that exploration and the telling of that story, it inspires people of what it means for them. And um, like that's beautiful, right? That's like art at its deepest level.
Thank you. It's not it, as I've said, it's not an easy path, and I often doubt and get confused, but there are moments where where things come together and I go, wow, yay, and I'm glad that I'm sticking to it.
Yes. Uh, well, it's hard when we have um, our own inspirations and our passions, and it's easy to talk ourselves out of them or get sidetracked and forget why we're doing it. And it's important to try and or to not give up, right? Because it's in those moments that we find the most power and the uh, unique aspect of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to bring and how it can move forward. So, yeah, it's not always easy. I guess if life was easy, though, we wouldn't all be here learning.
Right.
So, yeah.
So true. So true.
So, do you
Yeah.
have a favorite creation of all of your creations? Do you have one that has the most powerful message to you?
Um, I can't, I mean, often it's the one I'm working on is my favorite just because I'm enmeshed in it. And, yeah. And
That makes sense. That means you're completely present. That's beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think there is a recent one called The Two Travelers, which, um, really stretched me and was hard and it's long and it's a pretty intense tale. And, so yeah, I feel, but they're all my children, you know. I think
Yeah.
and I don't have physical children, and so even more so, my art really it does feel like these are my children. So I love them all.
Yeah, they're your creations, right? Like when we can be that inspired and that in love with what we're creating, then those things do feel like our children. That's really cool, right? Like that's um like we to me that's like the ultimate. If your creations actually feel like your children, then wow, right? You're living and doing what you love.
It's been strange though, because for many, many, many years, I wrote plays and screenplays, and before screenplays, I wrote plays, and I would take a year to write a play, and then I'd work on it for years. I was really a child, but I, couldn't get maybe somebody to produce that play. And so then it's like nobody, I don't have anywhere to put the child except in a drawer.
No, that feels sad.
Yeah, it's strange. It's a very strange experience. And lately I've started to have this fantasy that there are other dimensions in reality, the ascended masters or whoever, and they're enjoying my creation. That makes me happy and there was one short script that I sent out a lot and it never got picked up. And I, during COVID, thought, all right, I'm going to make it with the dolls. And I felt really nervous because all these gatekeepers, all these producers had turned it down. And I thought, well, who am I to make it? Maybe it's not good enough. But I just said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And it got into all these film festivals and people really like it. And so it's a very strange world to make things kind of like scripts that don't really exist yet. They're sort of still in the womb in a way. And then to deliver it into the world in a project that I was scared to do because who am I? Who am I to do it? Nobody gave me permission. And it's fascinating to give yourself permission.
Well, and it wasn't.
You feel that
yet.
way with the podcast? Have you felt that way with the podcast?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I had the idea for it and I'm like, is anybody really going to listen to this? And I'm like, I'm just going to do it anyway. So, it will, it's definitely one of trusting those guidances and moments of inspiration to just have these beautiful, fun conversations that do bring meaning to things that we might not normally bring meaning to, or to take topics that are spiritual or even not spiritual and just unwind them and dive deeper into them and not, go light with them. And it's kind of how I live my everyday life. My one daughter frequently says to me, I'll start to respond to something when she asks a question and she's like, do you have to go spiritual again? And I'm like, yeah, I do.
Oh, that's funny.
So, yeah, it is, but it is hard, right? Like it's the most vulnerable thing to do is take something you've created and then fully bring it to fruition, right? Like that. I can imagine that was really, really hard, right? Because we want other people's approval, and we want their acceptance. And so, yay for you for taking and actually just creating it. That's awesome.
Thanks. It is a really wild journey, that's for sure. And I sort of create them for a particular community, the seeking community that you're speaking about a lot, but then also mainstream. And I try to be for both, and it's hard. Yeah, it's hard for me to be unattached to outcomes, man, because I really do get attached to wanting to be in film festivals and wanting that approval and wanting people to like it. And yeah, it's definitely a very interesting path, because you need some strong ego to be a creator, but you also need to let go of that ego in order to live a balanced spiritual life. So it's a ton of learning. It's a lot of learning.
Well, that's what we're here doing, right? It's our earth is our school. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we're not learning, we're dying. So as long as we keep learning, we're making progress and we're growing and expanding our consciousness. So that's the be in the journey, be in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how can you share with others how they can watch your films or learn more about what you do?
Oh, yes. It's the easiest way is my name. So Laura, Laura, Lewis, Lewis, Barr, Barr, films, Laura Lewis-Barr films.com. And that gets you to social media and my YouTube channel and other information about what I'm doing. I'm thrilled not only to do podcasts like this, but I've been presenting at conferences, Jungian, as in Carl Jung conferences, and um, doing workshops with people. So it's been really amazing and wonderful. And I'd love people to visit that site and subscribe to my channel and start to build community because originally, I just wanted to make films. I just want to do films. Leave me alone. Let me be in the basement. But unfortunately, I feel like part of my calling is to help create community because my feeling is there's a desperation for it in the world right now. And I'm desperate for it too. So a lot of what I do when I'm not making films these days is to try to find places where we can come together. And the films become a vehicle for that sometimes.
Yes, I think community is extremely valuable and necessary. And it's our connections that, we get to share the joy and the fun of life and what we're doing and living. So yeah, I love that you're focused on community. I agree. I think there needs to be more of that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Laura, for joining me today. It's been a ton of fun to dive into fairy tales and their many meanings and just conversation around how we take something that normally, we would normally think of as such a simple topic of kids' fairy tales and, just explore that they are so much more powerful than that. And so thank you. Like, I really appreciate that. I think if anything, it gives new meaning to everybody when they're reading fairy tales to their kids and to their grandchildren and bringing in and being curious of, watching a new interpretation and a new perspective on them versus just the continued reprint of the words of the fairy tales that we have in books. I think you bring an aspect of new life to them. And that's really cool. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sheila. You made my day.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for listening. You've just listened to the Spiritual Geek Podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to share a comment and rating on your favorite podcast platform. If you were inspired, consider sharing with friends and family. Love and light to each of you, and may your day be filled with joy and wisdom as you consciously create your life.